Hello students, today we are going to look at a very important phenomena which is the internet. We're going to try and understand the influence of internet on social structures and social relationships, and we are going to look at how the internet has been able to transform our micro and macro worlds. Now, the influence of the internet actually began from the 1970s onwards, and it has completely reconfigured our social, economic and political institutions. Now, this intensification has of course led to the spread of globalization in the later part of the 20th century. Now, in sociology, we try and understand social institutions as normative patterns of interaction. And some of the most important social institutions are the economy, the state, media, the family, and so forth. Now, all these institutions have undergone certain forms of changes which have been a result of the spread of information and communication technologies, and particularly the internet. And the increasing use of internet as a communication tool has actually led to the creation of the virtual space or a cyberspace, which has had far-reaching consequences and have altered the way in which we experience our everyday life. A brief history of the internet is important in this case. Now, the internet is defined as an electronic form of communication which is based on a system of interconnected computers that make possible the storage, retrieval, circulation and processing of information and communication across space and time. Now, the internet was actually created during the Cold War period in the military headquarters at Pentagon in 1969, and it enabled scientists who worked for the military in different parts of America to share resources and equipment. Now, and it is in this process that they also began sending messages to each other via this interconnection of computers, and that led to the birth of what we now popularly know as email. What started as a conglomeration of say 500 computers has now expanded to, of course, millions of computers. This network has only grown, and it has actually eventually led to the creation of the World Wide Web, and which is a global multimedia library. Now, the spread of internet service providers have also actually led to the increasing use of internet globally, because now you have access to higher internet bandwidth and cheaper rates of internet. And hence, of course, this has resulted in the cyberspace being a very important site for social interaction in our everyday life. And it is in this context it's important to understand that the internet has become, in a sense, the fuel as well as the vehicle for globalization. Now, what this basically means is that it is internet technologies that are driving the forces of globalization, and at the same time, these processes of globalization take place in the cyberspace that has been created by the internet. Now, James Levin points out as to why it is important for sociologists to try and understand the internet, and how can it serve the discipline of sociology and social science generally. Now, the internet has radically reorganized information and social relationships across space and time. Now, the ramifications of the internet can actually be seen in the social life of communities as well as individuals, and this needs to be studied. And the internet has also led to enormous changes at the local level as well as the global level, right? Because it has fundamentally altered the way we communicate with each other and construct us social relationships across space and time. And it also foregrounds horizontal communication across space and time, and this has also modified our relation with tradition as well as other forms of authority. Another important reason why sociologists are interested in the internet is because it is an important tool for data collection and information gathering for sociological studies. And it has led to the birth of new kinds of approaches to understand social phenomena, right? So say, for instance, cyberethnography actually uses the tropes of traditional ethnographies, but it uses it in the cyberspace. It tries to understand internet-mediated social interaction, and has become a very popular practice in the last 3 decades. Now, there are some themes around which the internet studies take place, such as the theme of globalization, detraditionalization, which is the loosening of traditional ties across the world, and social reflectivity, which is the way in which individuals have been given the opportunity to form their own lives, free from certain sort of institutional moorings. Now, Internet studies help us to understand how the internet fosters dialogic relationships between individual groups and organizations, how they empower individual groups and organizations to meet certain objectives and goals, to form strategic alliances and solidarities across the bounds of space and time and in different sort of social and geographical contexts. Internet studies have also tried to understand how cyberspace, while it in many ways fosters new forms of relationships and intimacies, it is also can sort of have, it can be a space for conflict mitigation and the appreciation of cultural differences that characterize, individual groups and organizations which are spread across the world. Social researchers are also interested in new forms of stratification, discrimination, and violence that have emerged in online spaces. Generally, internet studies actually follows a multidisciplinary approach to capture the complexities of social interaction in virtual spaces and the effects that it has on society. Internet is also interesting because it offers researchers an exciting space to share their own work and create a community, an academic community of sort of comprising of students, researchers, and interested individuals and groups who can learn and debate and reflect on various issues. And the popularity of this is very visible during this ongoing pandemic, where you can see that there is a plethora of possibilities that the internet has made possible in the form of virtual classrooms, webinars, online courses. Now, we're going to try and understand the macro influence that the internet has had on societies. And here we are going to look at the way in which Manuel Castells, who's a prominent sociologist, has tried to understand this phenomena and labeled it the emergence of the network society. Now, Manuel Castells defines network society as a social structure which is based on networks operated by information and communication technologies based in microelectronics and digital computer networks that generate, process, and distribute information on the basis of knowledge accumulated in the nodes of the networks. Now, this has, of course, had this network-based structures have had far-reaching consequences for various social institutions. Now, according to Manuel Castells, it has actually created a new form of economy, which he calls the network economy, which entails the global organization of production, distribution, and management, which is associated with very high rates of productivity. Now, this is made possible through three interconnected processes. First is the generation and diffusion of digital technologies on the basis of scientific research and innovation. So, the internet speeds are getting faster, their access is improving. Then this is associated with the growth of a highly educated set of autonomous labor that is capable of adopting to a continuously sort of changing global and local economy, depending on the dynamism that is inherent in these fast developing technologies, right? And this has actually led to the development of new forms of organizations which are based on networks. Now, how do these organizations operate? Now, what has happened is the large organizations of the industrial era have decentralized themselves into more semi-autonomous units. Now, what they do is that they subcontract their operations to small and medium-sized business firms which are spread across the world, who have relative autonomy and flexibility. And then it is these large corporations and their allied networks that are activated or dissolved following the completion of business projects which concern, say, products, certain kinds of processes, forms of marketing, functioning, and resource production. Now, in this networked form of organization, the corporate firm actually becomes a connecting mode between networks of production which are built around these business projects which are spread all over the world through subcontracting, and it involves a network of accumulated capital which are again managed by structures of global finance. So, the network economy then has also been linked to flexible employment, labor mobility, and continuous reskilling of the workforce because of the changing nature of the technology and the environment in which production and distribution takes place. So, what this has done is that it has sort of eroded the notion of a stable, predictable career, which was often associated with the idea of, the male breadwinner in sort of modern societies, particularly after the Second World War. And what has also happened today is that labor contracts have individualized. There is also a feminization of the labor force as a result because of the entry of flexible women workers. Now, by flexible women workers, what it means is that, companies hire and fire women often, and they are sort of segregated into contractual part-time flexible jobs, which helps these corporations, but at the same time is a little exploitative to the workers. Now, in such a networked economy, the ability to work autonomously is seen as an important asset, right? And Manuel Castles actually refers to this as self-programmable labor, and he says that it is the labor which is able to function autonomously that has more bargaining power in the market. So they are still able to get good jobs because companies depend on them for their higher rates of productivity and innovation. Now, moving from the economy, we come to the social arena. So, according to Manuel Castles, a new form of sociability has emerged where people are continuously trying to link their offline worlds with their online worlds, or link their real sort of interaction with their virtual realities. And this Manuel Castles calls hypersocial society. Now, this sociability, according to Manuel Castles, is actually premised on what he calls networked individualism, which is that it is premised on a culture of individualism where it is individuals who select their modes of communication depending on their needs and moods. In fact, Manuel Castles goes on to say that network society is actually a society of networked individuals, and internet offers individuals the opportunity to sort of construct their own lives as a result of the global exposure that they receive, and also the loosening of traditional imperatives in the local context that they find themselves in. Now, as individuals' identities, interests, lifestyles, and social performance and interaction with divergent groups and communities are sort of influenced by the internet, and this has had a lot of important consequences for the way in which individuals interact today. And it has also led to some changes in the way in which our media is structured. Now, Castles notes three important trends in the way in which media has been restructured in a network society. Now, here global media conglomerates operate at the global and local levels that provide media products such as television, radio, films, books, music, and news. So you see the same large transnational media corporation actually catering to a whole range of media products. And so what this does is that this makes communication both standardized because of the nature of the products, but also customized depending on the markets that these large corporations tend to serve. Now, digital communication is more interactive, unlike previous systems of mass media, because it is not centralized, and it involves the intensification of horizontal communication. This sort of Castles refers to as self-directed mass communication. Why? Because it is individuals or group of individuals who actually initiate communication, and they can simultaneously communicate literally with the whole world. And they do this through, say for instance, internet blogs, video blogs, podcasts, social networking platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, which sort of allow individuals to communicate across space and time, and they do it outside the limitations of traditional social institutions, right, where who you can communicate and how much and in what way may be more determined. But the internet becomes this free space for individual interaction. Now, the existence of transnational media corporations on one hand and the explosion of the self-directed mass communications actually has created a space of socialized communications which has important political implications. Social media can dominate people's mind through this mechanism of the absence-presence of a message. So, whatever or whoever is not present in the media in this space of virtual interaction actually is erased from the minds of people. So then social media can be used for creating political hegemony and counter hegemony, and not simply during electoral campaigns. And these also depend on the ways in which politicians and their policies are made or unmade in media space. So there is a way in which, people try to create positive images of politicians, etc., to draw their audience. We also know of various kinds of scandal politics that happen. So say, for instance, the role of sort of Facebook in actually helping certain kinds of political campaigns, including in the US presidential elections, as well as Brexit, which happened recently, and sort of Facebook got in a bit of trouble for it. There is also a change that takes place in the state. Now, as a consequence of political globalization, a new form of state has emerged, which is very distinct from the nation state of the industrial era. In a network society, the state cannot operate simply at the national level. States have to engage in a process of global governance without the creation of a single government. So this Castle says that, that we don't have a single global government simply because, there is a historical sort of inertia where social institutions do not want to radically change, and hence, also nation states want to retain some of the sovereignty which can get challenged, or they feel that there is a threat to that being challenged because of the forces of globalization. So the emergent network state is actually premised on a process of decentralization at the sort of, the regional levels as well as the local levels, right? So what has happened then is that, the governance actually occurs at different levels, which is the supranational, the national, the local, the regional, and even at the level of, say, for instance, NGOs, where sovereignty and sort of governance is actually a shared process across various levels. Now, so these were some of the changes that have been affected by internet by and large, and they have been termed as network society, and they have consequences for the economy, the media, the way in which individuals communicate with each other, and the way in which governance and state are sort of functioning in globalized world. Now we're going to now move on to try and understand what is the consequences of the internet on microstructures, and we're going to hence look at relationships. We're going to concentrate on two types of relationships. One is friendship, the other is romantic love. Now, the virtual world, of course, as you know, is a space of communication, through the proliferation of chat rooms, etc., social networking platforms, and so on and so forth. Now, initially there was this idea that because of the proliferation of online communication, there is a depersonalization of face-to-face interaction, and there's a reduction in face-to-face interaction. But studies have actually shown that interaction on the internet is a new form of interaction which they call hyperpersonal, and this hyperpersonal interaction is actually contrary to perceptions, premised on trust among the people who actually interact with each other. Now, the study have stated to reveal certain aspects of online friendships. So here it is seen that trust was not limited to just people who shared information, and there wasn't. So even though there was anonymity, there was also trust which was premised on the online reputation of the people who were online. Friendships were built on this kind of reputation regardless of their offline self. The internet also seems to be providing a safe environment for self-disclosure and risk-taking, right? And in the internet, more sort of emphasis is placed in how you perform yourself rather than, what is your established persona within the sort of offline spaces. Also, the thing is that the hyper-personal communication is actually premised on a pre-commitment, which is the idea that you are going to actively self-disclose so that you're able to build trust in these online spaces and actually then forge friendships based on this pre-commitment to, self-disclosure. Also, in society from the late 20th century onwards, and particularly in Western societies, there is an emphasis on thinking of the internet as a valuable space for forging, friendships and intimacies, right? So because there is a positive vibe around the internet, that has also played an important role in the construction of sort of, friendships online, and they're not necessarily seen as frivolous, but are seen as a very important aspect of the everyday life of individuals. So our online friends friends are almost as important as our offline friends. Right? Now we'll come to the domain of romantic relationships. Now Aaron Benziv, in trying to understand the nature of online romantic relationships, invokes the concept of detached attachment. So he says that detached attachment can be summed up as an intimate closeness but at a distance. Because you see, because of the internet, two people are separated. They are not in the same physical space, but because of the intensity at which they interact, there is a certain kind of emotional closeness. So the physical separation may make the online relationship detached, but the intense emotion sustains the great attachment. Now, detachment, attachment, or online relationships is riddled with certain opposing aspects, such as distance and immediacy, lean and rich communication, anonymity and self-disclosure, continuity and discontinuity, sincerity and deception, physical and mental investment. We're going to look at each of these aspects and these conundrums. One is distance and immediacy. Now, although online relations are based on physical distance or differing locations, it is immediate in a temporal sense, which is that you can actually interact immediately across sort of wide distances and physical segregation. So what happens is that this immediacy actually, instead of creating emotional distance, it actually leads to greater emotional intensity because you are interacting at such a fast pace and continuously, right? So this is able to sort of create emotional bonds in the online space. Now again, there was this idea that because online communication is not face to face, there is obviously, it is a lean form of communication because there are not so many non-verbal cues in online communication. But actually research shows that that may not be the case, because online communication can actually be a very rich mode of communication, because sometimes individuals use the internet as a way where they can be sort of themselves more closely. They can ask more intimate questions easily rather than peripheral questions, and they can basically quickly get to the point and forge bonds of trust and reliability, right? So the internet can also be a space of rich communication, and of course today with these social networking platforms where you can actually present yourself in the form of video and images, right? I think that the issue of whether this is lean communication or rich communication seems to be more resolved, because the internet has become a source of rich communication across the world, right? Now, anonymity and self-disclosure. Now there is of course a greater level of anonymity in online spaces, and to that extent there is a reduced set of vulnerability, because I mean, you cannot harm an individual online beyond a certain point. But it is also important to acknowledge that because of the emotional and mental intensity of online relationships, actually there can be a lot of sort of mental and emotional influence on these people who are interacting online. So this is the sort of aspect of self-disclosure and anonymity. There is also this sort of binary between deception and sincerity that characterizes online relationships. So the idea that because it's online, you can easily lie to people. But what scholars have pointed out, that if at all people lie, they lie about what can be called identifying features, such as age, race, height, weight, gender, or employment status. Now because of the continuous development of sort of internet technologies and sort of network platforms, this has become more and more difficult, because you have these mandatory checks where you have to actually upload your real picture and you have to verify it, etc. So I think lying about identifying features have become sort of progressively lesser, the possibility of it. And also it's important to understand that it's difficult to lie about personal constitutive features such as kindness or sense of humor or wittiness and personal interest, which are important for the forging of sort of romantic bonds. In fact, it has shown that there is actually a lot of sincerity in online relationships, and people are more honest to each other. Studies have also shown that there is a gendered aspect to this. Women tend to be more sexually expressive in their online relationships, and men are more emotionally expressive in their online relationships. Of course, there is obviously, there is deception, and there are possibilities of flaming, trolling, and excessive social sort of self-disclosure, which may sort of, interfere with the boundaries that individuals set for each other. So, and this can then be read as intimidating behavior, harassment, violence, etc. Right. Another aspect of online romantic love is, of course, a continuity and discontinuity. The idea that, because it is online, it can actually quickly be ended simply because you can, with the click of a mouse, right? A person may also have more immediate demands on the sort of offline events, and hence again it's easy to terminate it. So generally there's this idea that, romantic relationships online are fungible, they don't last, they cannot be long term. But again, there are those who will actually point out that, because of the immediacy across space and across physical distance, right, that in a temporal sense that online relationships are possible, what happens is that these relationships can actually flourish, and they can be more emotionally intense, and they can continue for a long time because they are free from the sort of practical constraints that can sometimes impinge on social relationships offline, because there are these institutional structures which tell you offline, how to behave, how to interact, and so that limits your possibility of finding romantic love, which is actually way more in the online space. Now, physical and mental investment. Again, the thing is that there are some who would point out that it requires lesser physical investment, of course, because you're not meeting the person face to face. But again, with video and image becoming a part of online interaction, you're continuously sort of visibilizing yourself in some sense. So you are showing your physical self, as it were, and so the thing is that while there is an understanding that yes, there may be lesser physical or mental investment pertaining to sort of romantic love online, but in effect what actually happens is that there is a stronger bond, there is greater investment, because more and more individuals are spending a lot of time on the internet and communicating on the internet, right? So it takes over sort of their lives and becomes, and these relationships become actually the more dominant relationships in the life of people. But also, because it does not have physical investment, there are possibilities of mental exhaustion, trauma, anxiety, and obviously a sort of a reluctance to trust people in the future. If what happens is that if you're not able to imagine the same kind of relationship, because online that everything is not visible, it's not face-to-face interaction. So two people's expectations may not align with each other, and when that does not happen, then of course that can lead to disappointment and so on and so forth. But online relationships have sort of become more preponderant, and they have these contradictions, such as they are physically distant but emotionally attached. They are intensely social, but at the same time they depend on isolation, because you're using sometimes only your mobile phone or a computer, so you are just with yourself when you're interacting. And it is a form of mass personal communication, but at the same time a form of mass communication. And besides enabling sort of heterosexual relationships online, conventional relationships which have now gone online, the digital space has been particularly relevant and revolutionary for LGBT individuals, making it possible for them to forge friendships, romantic intimacies, and a sense of a community online. To conclude, I would want to say that social institutions and everyday intimacies have undergone profound changes due to the creative possibilities offered by the internet. The discussions in the lecture so far demonstrate how internet has fundamentally transformed the microstructures and institutions of economy, media, and the state. Alongside, they indicate how internet have also impacted the microstructures of intimacy and belongingness. The internet has not only transformed the ways in which we work and interact and are governed, but also who we are, who we love, or in some instances hate. Thank you.